Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, this is a difficult time of 2023 when we're hearing about a lot of companies, big companies, Salesforce, Zoom laying off hundreds of people. And we're seeing on LinkedIn looking for jobs and kind of that rebuilding process. But what's not talked about a lot is the sales leaders who are also being let go and what that journey is like for them. And so I had the privilege of speaking with Chris DiEllo, and he shared his story of, being with the company for many, many years and then being let go. And when you think about the initial, blow of being let go, what goes through your mind? And there's shame, there's letting your team down, your family down, and you really get in your head for a moment. But then we really talked about the pause and that time in between, you start putting yourself out there. And I feel that this is where the gold is that introspective and reflective period that you start really looking at, okay, what happened? What role did I play in this? Was it beyond my control and this was inevitable anyway? And so kind of letting that shame go and giving yourself permission to lick your wounds a little bit and rebuild and just kind of say, how am I going to reemerge here as a result of, what did the pandemic teach me? What have I learned in the past 20 years? What pace do I want to continue? Because we're going at such a quick pace. We're spending all this time on flights and away from my family. And so I think the longer you spend in this time to really decide and choose how I want to reemerge is going to align you to the types of company, the types of people, the type of industry that you can best serve based on what you don't want to do anymore. Do I want to be operating, always in that hamster wheel, always just showing up? No. So how do I want to reemerge? And this is what we talked about, is that 2.0. And he shared, he was very vulnerable. He shared a lot of the emotions, a lot of what he was feeling. And I feel it could help a lot of people because, as I mentioned, it's not something we talk about a lot. And I would say there are definitely a lot of sales leaders in this position. And then he also shared about what it was like to get back out there in the interviewing process and that it was very different from it was before, and some messages to some of the interviewers as to what they could do differently, what would be more helpful, and what were some of his learnings. So definitely, if you're a sales leader and you find yourself in this position, highly, highly encourage you to take a listen and just reflect on, Chris's story. Do you see yourself in parts of it? Is there something that he's done that might help you? And he's invited to share his email that if anyone wanted to reach out and ask him any questions, he'd be happy to field them. So definitely enjoyed a very honest, vulnerable conversation, and encourage you to take a listen. And as always, let us know what you think. To continue to grow the show, if you haven't sent us a review, we would love to get a review. Let us know how we're doing, what you enjoy about the podcast. And what this does is it increases our visibility to get great guests like Chris and others on the podcast. So encourage you to write a review wherever you listen to your podcast. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Now, with a lot of individual contributors, unfortunately, getting let go with major companies such as Salesforce, Zoom, we're hearing a lot of that. We really never hear the story of sales leaders and what it's like for them to unfortunately get let go, but also that rebuilding process and trying to get it back out there on the market. So I'm delighted to bring Chris DiEllo to the podcast to share his story. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'm grateful to be here.
My pleasure. And really what stuck out to me, Chris, is that when I looked at your LinkedIn profile, some of the adjectives you used to describe yourself were trusted, passionate, dedicated, accountable, and then integrity, empathy, active listening, gratitude. And for me, that really caught my attention in terms of, what good leadership and what servant leadership is. because a lot of times there's still that dictator and that leading in fear, which doesn't work. But I'm just curious if we just kind of give some backstory to our listeners. Why don't you start and just letting us know, like, what compelled you to get into leadership and a little bit about what that journey looked like?
Fair enough. And after all those adjectives, it's supposed to be predicated by humble at some point. Instead of chest pounding, I suppose I should also be reflective and accepting of correction and so forth. So, really, I'm a schooled mechanical engineer and had worked for a CAD company as a sales engineer, really demo jockey, mouse monkey, whatever you want to call it. And then, because that was with a CAD software called Pro Engineer, a colleague of mine, actually a former college fraternity brother of mine, had started a business that was a configurator business. You know, pick your features and options and actually build whatever, a bill of material or drawing and so forth. They were a young company and looking for a salesperson with a technical background. So became an individual contributor. They bet on me, really. I had no direct sales experience. And I was fortunate enough that they were patient with me and allowed or enabled me to grow with the company as it grew. And then, amazingly enough, 15 years later, that company was sold to a larger software company. And I was a bit thrust into management or leadership. Well, let me differentiate between those two. My former manager, a gentleman named Ron Mao, who is fantastic, I'm sure you'll hear his name more than once today, decided to go in a different direction after the business was sold. He was one of the original founders and owners, and he was putting me in positions to be recognized by the new leadership team that was there. And my naivete, I was actually recommending other people, well, shouldn't Alex do that because he has a bigger customer to talk about or a larger success story? Long way to say, Ron exited the business. I had to put a resume together after 15 years of not having a resume, and applied for the job and got the first management position. I say management because, as I've learned and continue to learn, that leadership isn't necessarily done from only, um, I guess, people managers, in so to say. And so it's really how you lead through example and day-to-day operations and activities and even conversations, and having someone's back or having empathy and listening has is evidence and actual leadership. And again, endeavoring to try to be humble, what I what I learned was that Ron recognized that I learned so much from him, but he saw that in me, and that was one of the reasons he pushed me forward there. Now, once there, I wasn't a very good leader, Karen. I
Mhm.
wasn't. I was timid, and then one of the guys on my team said, hey, you need to stop being our colleague and peer and start being a leader, start being a
Mhm.
manager. And that helped me. That was about a year later, and then we ended up spinning off as a separate company. And my two partners, Dan and Mick, actually helped give me confidence and so on. So that's where I ended up as a leader.
Well, that's great, and it seems like, Ron saw something. You said initially you had to bet on you, but it sounds like Ron also bet on you, which I'm sure helped to build your confidence. As you mentioned, you were thrust into leadership, but knowing that someone else, and, it was his company, that's gotta give you something to be like, "Well, if he sees something in me, then my god, I gotta see something in me as well."
Completely fair. Yeah, it was. Um, this is, I had a high school baseball coach that used to say, "I- picture yourself making the most difficult play that you can make. That way, when you actually have to make that play, you've
Mhm.
already made it once in your mind. So
Mhm.
you'll have that experience or that success." And that was part of how having Ron having my back really, and even just other gents on my team having my back, or other people on the team. But it was really me just being faced with experiences and trying to learn from them to instill confidence. And it's amazing. At 30 something year old, you ought to be confident in yourself, or you should have good self-esteem, and sometimes you just don't. You have that need for approval.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, that's great. Good for you for recognizing that, even, that's part of you, because I think only when you're aware of it can you start working on it. Um, and I love that about the baseball because that's just visualization, right? And kind of put yourself in those positions, like you said, so that when they actually happen, you're like, I'm not. This isn't the first time in the ring in this compromising position. I know how to get out of here because I've been there so many times. So I think that was really great advice. And so just talk to me about when your colleagues said, you got to stop being a peer and start being a leader like that. That might have hurt the ego a little bit, but like what, there was obviously something there, Chris, that propelled you to say like, I gotta step up here. And so talk to us about like what that was like.
Yeah, appreciate recognizing that. His name is Jim, and he's a former Army guy, and respected. His owned his own rep firm before he went into back into direct sales and in software and so on. So I respect him, and appreciated the feedback, which was unfiltered.
Mhm.
It was an ego blow, and it the way I'll describe it, kind of, it gave me permission to hold my team accountable. I knew I would always hold myself accountable, but it gave me the permission or the latitude that I should have had. I recognize now, but to really ask them the tough questions, hold them
Mhm.
accountable, make sure that they're doing what they ought to do, or make sure that they're getting my or whomever's help is required. So it was really that almost just allowance or
Mhm.
permission.
I love that because well, first of all, army guys probably don't have a filter, so he probably did you a favor. But think about that. You said you were thrust into this, so it wasn't your, my path for the last 20 years since I've wanted to do this. You were kind of thrown into something, and so you almost need someone to say, like, "I'm giving you permission," just because it wasn't kind of planned or expected. But once he did that, it feels like you're like now you're like, "I got this. Like, I can let go, and you can actually see what I'm made of." But you almost needed someone like that to go, Chris, like it's okay to do that.
Yes, which is I don't know if it's good or bad, but yes, it was absolutely a turn. I've heard of this tipping point in sales
Yeah.
campaigns. You can kind of feel when things shift,
Mhm.
and ideally impact when they're going to shift or how they'll
Mhm.
shift. And that was that was one piece of the puzzle there that fell into place.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Well, as an engineer, I'm sure you can calculate the tipping point.
uh, don't know what I used to know anyway.
So great opening here. I love just the, and first of all, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing because a lot of people think well, leaders we have it all figured out and we go up there. And this is just really honest and saying I didn't and I didn't know and I was afraid and I didn't have the confidence and I should have. So I just think that there's other people listening to this that might be like, "Oh my god, I feel this too. I thought it was imposter syndrome." And so thank you for just sharing this because I know that some of our listeners are all facing this and you've normalized it and that's what we need more of this. So thank you for that. So talk to us now a little bit Chris about so we're kind of, moving from the growth and then unfortunately there was a little bit of a hiccup where there was a letting go. And so talk to us about what happened and ultimately, you were let go. So just walk us through that process.
Yeah, yeah, it all makes sense. So my partners and I sold our business, and fast forward 9 months, I was let go from the business, which was unexpected, and to use a phrase, an ego blow. It was I was incredibly humbled. I can feel emotions welling up inside me as I say these words aloud. Yeah, I'm guilty of having professed and believed that in work situations and life situations I'd check my ego at the door. I'd been taught that as a salesperson, and it, being let go really made me realize that I had an ego, and
Mhm.
and that I'd been humbled by that. And some of that was disappointment in myself. I felt as if I had let down my wife, that I had let down my team, and not just my direct report team, sales team specifically, but even the customer success people, the professional service people that I supported, depending upon the customer involvement and so on, and let down our customers. I just when I after I was let go, and before my email was shut off, I sent 3 emails to the leadership team, just explaining these 3 customers that really just needed help. I had had meetings with them that day and so forth. So So it was, beyond the shock and the humbling, it it gave me some time to, yeah, quite literally time to reflect.
Mhm.
And yeah, so maybe I've given you too much info here, but it was an emotional, unexpected, but humbling, and in some ways very beneficial because it let me reflect.
That's great. And I want to get into the reflecting point, but before that, you mentioned, your ego, and I would say, but you're also human. Like, at the end of the day, something you were shocked, you were caught off guard, and so I think you're human, and those emotions and what came up for you is because you have a pulse and a heart and a soul, and you're human. So I wouldn't be too hard on yourself, and I can imagine because from what I'm getting from you is that you care so much about your team, about your customers, that you actually, took the time to send before your emails shut off. Like most people are, I don't know what they're doing, copying all their stuff or whatever, just leaving the building. But you still had that customer focus and say, like, let me just give that. So what I'm taking from this is that there's some things in life you can't control. And most likely the axe was going to fall anyway. And so what part of this was you actually versus just this decision, especially when you think about acquisitions? People come in with their own direction, their own strategies that inevitably they're going to let people go. All right. And so I would imagine that there's definitely that initial, like, oh my God, what could I have done differently? Like, there's blame, there's guilt, there's maybe even a bit of shame. But as you said, in the reflective time, I'm sure there was like, hang on a minute, like, I was a good person. I did a lot of good things. These guys were going to do this anyway. I imagine that's not your first thought, but and maybe walk us through that reflective period. What came up for you after the incident happened, and just that, I'm not going to say downtime, but that reflective time where you're sitting and saying, well, hang on a minute. I'm licking my wounds. I'm not ready to get back out there. But what were some of those thoughts, emotions that you were feeling in those moments?
Yeah. So shame was one of them. You called it out, right? And I, I I thank you for mentioning the human aspect of things. And it, yeah, I don't know if this is true of today's culture, but I guess the way I was kind of brought up and made is that, well, that doesn't hurt. I'm
Hmm.
invincible. I can do this. Or growing up in sales, had read Anthony Parinello's book, Selling DeVito, and he really made a comparison between a sports athlete putting on a uniform and a salesperson putting on a game face, putting on a uniform. And it's that
Hmm.
idea. So as much as you needed to have empathy when talking with team members or talking with prospects or customers or whatever, there was still this level of, impenetrable me that
Yeah.
I thought would exist. And so when that didn't, and admittedly, I had been fortunate enough with as hard as my wife works to take care of our life, everything but, the job I had. She does everything else. I was fortunate enough to really put so much focus to the job, and I believe that helped me myself successful. Uh, but it also was my identity. Not necessarily my title
Hmm.
specifically, but just my association with the business, and I felt confident because I was competent in that business specifically. So it was shame when that was kind of removed. It was a oof. That doesn't feel good.
Hmm.
The reflective piece, my first thought was I didn't adapt. I should have adapted it to what new thing was, whatever that was, and I didn't use whatever phrase you're looking for. Old dog doesn't learn new
Hmm.
trick, or complacency. Maybe those. I thought I was just keeping my head down, working my tail off, and that was the answer. And that what I learned through through reflection is that isn't
Hmm.
always the answer. And then the reflection went to, in addition to adapting that I could have adapted, how could I have supported my team better? And this was the point where, I was very fortunate. The COO of one of the customers we had reached out to me on LinkedIn after not getting a response through email, and asked me to call him, and I called him and explained, that I had been let go and so forth. he recommended a book called Necessary Endings by Henry Cloud, and I recommend it to folks. It's I'm not an avid reader, but it was worthwhile understanding what Henry Cloud will talk about as the seasons of life and pruning and so forth.
Mhm.
And it's just it helps you give more. It gave me anyway more objective recognition of what was going on versus
Mhm.
subjective,
Yeah.
and removed a bit of the emotion. Uh, and so that helped dealing with things. But then looking back, in kind of my next book was around servant leadership, which had been introduced to me back in 2016. We were doing individual development plans for some of the team members, and one of the gents, another Army guy. A lot of the people in my life are West Pointers and so forth, just because of how I came up through business. And his name is Preston Stewart, has a wonderful podcast around war stories. But Preston said that he endeavored to be a servant leader, and it was the first time I had heard that phrase. So I did
Mhm.
a little research and then asked him about it and quizzed him about it. And he's such a humble dude, but he described it. So I started gravitating after reading Necessary Endings, started gravitating toward some servant leadership books and realizing how I didn't do my job, or I didn't feel as if I had done my job as a leader to really develop or enable other people to develop into leaders. And so that was another reflection point, I guess. And in the final one, I'll say, and then I'll stop maybe being so so loquacious here. But the final thought, it was deciding whether or not I wanted to go back into a similar, same at pace environment. And and again, having been for 20 plus years nearly living the job, and which was fine. You could argue it was right or wrong. I don't know that I would have been as successful as I was without having done it that way, just based on how I'm wired. But I didn't know that I wanted to go back into that pace again. And so, and admittedly, between you, me, Karen, and
Mhm.
whoever else is listening to this, I don't know that I still want to go back into that pace.
Yeah.
So I'll stop now.
Yeah. Well, lots. I mean, all I can say there and is the pause. The pause is so important, and that reflect even in a discovery meeting versus just what happened to you, but it just allows the reflective things to come in that wouldn't have otherwise come in. So you're like you said, you're creating space and giving yourself permission. You gave yourself that what who gave you initial permission? You gave yourself permission in that moment to let go of the shame, because I think if you're hanging on to shame, you're not healing. You almost can't do both. And then what you said is even just, you weren't conforming or adapting. And you saw that as a bad thing, but maybe it's like, hang on, I was meant to beat to my own drum here. So maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe this is like, you know what? That was, the last 20-year Chris, but it's like, kind of like this metamorphosis. Who I want to reemerge is not that person. And that's okay. But that's what came out in that moment of pausing and reflection. And then finally, what you were saying is the pace. And so think about even the pandemic, and all of a sudden our world stopped. And whether you're a parent or someone who, lived on an airplane, you're getting again the pause and going, do I really want to go back to taking my kid 5 days a week to sports? Like, do I want to be on a plane so much that I'm missing my wife's birthday? I'm missing self-care. I'm not taking care of myself, but it's when you're in it, it's hard to see it. So again, all of this came out from you of the pause, and it sounds like there's a bit of a kind of a negative spin, but I would take it as a positive. And almost you describe yourself as gratitude. Like, I would be grateful for these lessons, even your friend sharing those books, because think about one of them was the necessary ending, and that's you mourned it. But then the next one was servant leadership. Like, that introduced you to someone, you did homework. And again, here comes look out world. Chris is coming up on the upswing and he's now a servant leader. And he didn't know what that was before.
Yeah, and it's not some of the I'm guilty of self-deprecating, probably more often than I ought, and being accountable, or being really locus central, is understanding. Okay, I take responsibility for that, and I truly, the experiences that I've had, positive or negative, are what has, and I think this is true for all people, is life experiences is what makes you.
Mhm.
It enables you to deal with, adapt to, overcome, whatever words you want to use there, the next time you're faced with whatever, or a friend or a
Mhm.
colleague is faced with a similar situation where you can share that. And so when I say, oh, I should have adapted, that was you're right about being grateful for the situation, because next time I'll have that in my quiver, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'll have it recognized. Oh, okay, that's a tool in my toolbox. Gosh darn it, I didn't do that last time. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to recognize that that is an option for me and be more receptive,
Mhm.
open
Mhm.
to change.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think those are great. It allows you the awareness to say, this wasn't a mistake. This was brought to my attention. And next time, I'm not going to wait until it's too late. I'm going to try to get in front of it. And I think it's just whatever it is, it's being mindful and present to say, I see this. I can see myself going down the same pattern here. This looks familiar to me. I'm going to pull back a little bit. It's like those choose your own adventure books. Remember like, it's going to end in A. How can I kind of backpedal so I can steer it towards B a little bit with intentionality?
yeah. Well said. Well said. I'm sure this is an overused cliche, but it's something like history doesn't change. If or
Yeah,
history repeats itself if you don't change, and that's
totally.
again just knowing how I evolved within my career. There was absolute, and I know we're supposed to get out of our comfort zone, so I'll preface this by saying
Mhm.
that, but there was
Yeah.
absolute a comfort, and some of that was just because I had done it. There weren't too many questions I hadn't heard, and
Mhm.
couldn't answer on a professional level. So
Mhm.
now I learned quickly as I was interviewing that that wasn't the case, and shame on me. But during what I was doing, really there was a comfort level there, so there wasn't necessarily the reason to be as open to change or accepting or even proactively looking for a new approach to something, which is I've been educated, Karen. I realize that there are
Mhm.
so many different ways now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's good. And that's, awareness. And I think those who are listening, how can you in that moment, look inward and say, like, what am I missing here? Like what's kind of, and sometimes we need that accountability or the coach, but sometimes like what's in my rear view mirror here? What is holding me back? What am I not seeing? And I think when we're operating, as you said, as a pace that we are not even going to see that. But sometimes we don't intentionally want to slow down because we know if we see it, we got to do something about it, and we're perhaps not prepared to do the work.
Well said. Yes. Yeah. All true. And that pace piece, there was, I don't, comfort might not be the right word, but there was, I knew what to expect. My
Mhm.
day, either through my own scheduling or people putting things on my schedule, my day was scheduled every
Mhm.
day, and so it was, you referred to a hamster wheel earlier, whether you use that
Mhm.
analogy or just, okay, I put my game face on, where it used to be I'll get in the car at 3:30 in the morning, drive to the airport and forget which city I'm going to, or wake up at a hotel and
Mhm.
forget what city I'm in, but go to another sales meeting, versus or not dissimilarly, but just more locally, sitting at my PC having an online meeting. It was just there wasn't that much time to think, because there were
Mhm.
just these continuous activities, and so
Yeah.
there was just always something else to do, so you didn't spend as much time in your head, I guess,
Mhm.
until when I was let go, then well, boy, I spent a lot of time in my head. And so
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're painting there is that we're going through the motions, and think about the environment we're in now. And I would even invite sales leaders to ask, like, what are the expectations you're setting for your team? Like, are you back to back Zoom meeting that, just like that picture you painted, you're going through the motions, you're showing up, but you're like, I don't even have time to go to the washroom, or, in between that, I haven't even taken notes. I'm on the next one. So I'm physically here, but like, that's it. Like I'm a shell right now. And so I think there's an opportunity just to share what you went through to sales leaders out there now, saying, you can get in front of this. Like you can have your team not go through the hamster wheel, not be just showing up, and actually be intentional, being purposeful, because think about the person on the other end, especially if it's a potential customer and you're just showing up exhausted from call. Like, how are you differentiating yourself? How are you adding value? You're not.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes there's an icebreaker at the beginning of a call that you can leverage, you can commiserate with the prospect. Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't having gone to the bathroom today, or whatever the phrase. But
Yeah.
to your point, what value does that add? Now, does it build bond or
Yeah.
rapport? Probably not. Nothing
Yeah.
worthwhile, other than making you
Yeah.
human. Whereas and I completely recognize the importance of activities and metrics and KPIs and all these
Mhm.
quantitative things. Uh, However, a side thought here, I'm fortunate enough to be at a later stage in my life and career that I don't perhaps, or I can afford, quite literally, not to work
Mm.
at that pace, or have
Yeah.
that leisure, if that's the right way to say it. Uh,
Yeah.
Whereas, that would not have even been, I have a coffee mug that says "Work harder, nobody cares," because
Mhm.
that's what I did for 20 something years. I recognize the importance of hard work and smart work and activities.
Yeah.
I also appreciate the mindset of priorities and recognizing
Mhm.
where work fits, where life fits, where family fits, where whatever other things that fit. All those things are
Yeah.
important. And I don't have the answer ahead of your question. I don't have the answer of how you balance those. I'll warn you now.
Yeah. That's a $1,000,000 question we're all seeking, but I think just what you said there, Chris, is, we all wanna work harder and smarter, but not to the detriment of, our health, our family, our marriage, our relationships. At that point, we're not helping anybody.
Yes. Yeah. Very true. Very true. And I will, for the however many time, give gratitude, appreciation for my wife, Robin. She's incredibly patient. She's an incredibly strong person, has an opinion, will tell me how to go complete a sale or why I shouldn't go
Mm.
chase that prospect or whatever the case is. But at the same time, has afforded me the opportunity to do what I
Mhm.
did for as many years as I did by really taking care of the rest of our lives. So
Mhm.
I recognize not everybody's in that situation, so maybe they can't put the focus or the level
Mhm.
of effort or the hours in. They just have different things. And my belief is, in hindsight, they're probably smarter than me, because probably is
Mhm.
a word crutch. They are smarter than me, Karen, because they recognize, whether it's through choice or through necessity, that their
Mhm.
focus needs to be in a different place, i.e., family at times.
Mhm.
Whereas our dinner table conversation would be like, this prospect said no. How do I get over
Mhm.
this? Or whatever. So yeah,
Mhm. Yeah. No, Robin sounds like a great woman, and what do they say? Behind every great man is a great woman.
behind me is a great woman. I don't know about me, but yeah,
No, that's good, but I mean, I think we're all guilty of that, like bringing work to the table and workaholics and all that stuff, and it really is it's effort to pull back and, even when you're having a date night or going out, and it's like, "Let's not talk about work." Like, that's us with the kids. It was like, "Let's not talk about the kids," and then you're you're like, "Well, I got nothing to say."
right.
Right? And it's like, okay, we gotta what this shows us that we're not intentional with, talking creatively, like talking about just compartmentalizing things. Work if there's a pie, work's a piece of it.
Darn
It doesn't
straight.
have to
Yep.
define me, consume
Yeah.
me, that I resent it. If something like this happens, I don't wanna resent it. I wanna say, "You know what? I still with that one piece, I worked it, I enjoyed it, but I still had other pieces of travel, of my friends, of spirituality, whatever it is."
All
So,
the
and just
above.
like you said, we don't have the no one has the answer to balance, and I think it's just integrating the 2, but I feel that it's being mindful, and when you feel that pendulum pull, or even before it starts pulling, you can recognize signs, triggers, what you're doing. You're like, I gotta get back here."
Yeah. Very well said. Yeah. Agreed.
So talk to us now, Chris, about you're going back out there, you're interviewing. And again, we hear it from the individual contributor standpoint, all these AEs out there, and some of them aren't doing the work. But what was that experience like from you? You're going back out there as a sales leader, you're interviewing. So, was there, again, did the ego reappear? And kind of what was that process like? And the reason I'm asking is this is from twofold. One, there's definitely people like you that are out there interviewing. Is there something that they can take away from the experience? And two, those who are doing the interviewing, is there anything that you did not appreciate or that wasn't done well enough that perhaps they could, polish their tools and kind of redeploy them as a result of what you're about to share?
I understand. So let's see, two succinct words, one for the people that are interviewing: preparation.
Mhm.
The succinct word or one word for the interviewers: feedback. So with that
Mm.
kind of punchline, I, I went about looking for my next gig opportunity, whatever the right phrase is, maybe in a bit of a different way than people have done. Um, I didn't have a huge sense of urgency. Again, had some severance pay, had some money saved. I didn't use my network. I didn't, in LinkedIn terms, open to work. Didn't do that. Some of that was, again, right or wrong, my pride in asking for help.
Mhm.
Some of it was because I was, as I mentioned, indecisive as to whether I wanted to get back on the hamster wheel. I wanted to go back to a pace like that. And the last was, I'd begun to work with a colleague, the gent I'm working with now, Ron Mao, Paperwork Pros, and I wasn't sure the perception that if I were on a sales call with him with a prospective customer, and that prospective customer checked us out on LinkedIn and it said open to work, they'd be like, "What the heck? I thought this guy was a full-time employee of Paperwork Pros." So it
Mhm.
was those pieces that made me not do this maybe in a conventional or as assertive manner as folks might do. I cobbled together my resume. I applied to jobs through LinkedIn. Um, I realized that I was incredibly rusty, and as much prep as I did for the first interview, I was horrified at my performance thereafter, and didn't get asked back for the second one. So again, humbling
Mhm.
process, ego blow. So yeah, did the ego return? It did, uh, and so interviewing reminds me of any sort of exercise. The more you do, the better you get, the more comfortable you are. So not that I had an exhaustive amount of interviews, uh, but I started to be able to anticipate, like I could in a sales call, anticipate what questions would be asked and have better answers for those. Or for the three questions I couldn't answer well, now I get answers for those. Now they'll never be asked again, right? But at least I'll have answers for those. Kidding aside, um, in addition to preparation, what I learned too late, probably, is being prepared to ask the interviewer smart, insightful questions. And
Mhm.
I'm guilty of not being creative. I can hone. I believe I can do this. Again, this is my humility coming through. Right? I believe I can hone a trait, a skill very well. It's just, my wife and I are on our third chicken coop that we're building right now. Some of that is because I'm a weekend carpenter and love doing that kind of thing. She is a creative aspect of combinations of whatever, and so I can't create a chicken coop from scratch. But if you show me a picture, I'll be able to make it even
Mhm.
better than that. So what's my
Mhm.
point? My point is that as it relates to coming up with insightful questions, you just need to give it some thought as to whatever
Mhm.
either the role is, the industry is, the job, or even the company's history, what the expectations are of you. There are smart questions that you can ask that I didn't learn until later in my interview, seasoned just repetitions. Um, and so it's also much tougher now, I believe, for the person being interviewed.
Mhm.
For the hires that I've done, other than a few in 2021, which were all done over online meetings, Teams or Zooms or something like that, um, all the hiring I did, the last interview would be an in-person interview. So there was
Mhm.
just a different sense that you had. There was a different, just I don't know what you want to call it, vibe that you could get from that
Mhm.
person being either presenting to you or just having going to lunch with them thereafter. There was just
Yeah.
something different. That wasn't the case, or likely maybe isn't the case now. That the
Mhm.
candidates for these roles, myself included, need to somehow show their difference, show how they're better through a very two-dimensional
Mhm.
interaction. And I recognize that goes all the way to sales or customer success
Mhm.
or customer support or whatever those things are. There needs to be this level of interaction, and I'm sure I talk way too much with my hands. But the that that's difficult to do, and it's a paradigm shift, and I applaud the candidates that are able to do it successfully. Um, and then maybe to the second part of your question, as I would do, and really smart people that I've worked with in the past would do, as we drove away from an account of a prospective customer, or as we'd get on an after action call or a debrief call after a sales call, we'd ask each other, what could we have done better? And so I took that approach. If I was told, hey, we're not going to move you forward, which
Hmm.
it's not, it's their right to do that. I can't harbor any ill will there. Sometimes I don't necessarily understand it, but I have to respect it.
Hmm.
So um, really, I'd ask for that feedback. Where did I let you down? How could I have done better? And it wasn't to try to change their mind or sell them to reconsider. It was instead to just get better, smarter, improve,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
be able to reflect and accept constructive criticism. And unfortunately, I get feedback from of the four companies. I know that's not a huge data set, but of the four companies
Hmm.
I didn't get moved forward on, zero feedback. So that was
Hmm.
disappointing. I would have appreciated that. So that's my recommendation to the company. I know it's a pain in the neck. It's
Hmm.
another thing to do. It's another email to write. But even if it's as simple as, you didn't smile enough, or I'm being wise, but
Yeah.
just tell me something that I can latch
Hmm.
onto that hopefully I can then use next time.
No, tons of great information there, Chris. And just what you said about that first part, the preparation, I imagine because it was what 20 years since you've interviewed. So I'm sure the landscape has changed, as you mentioned. Lunches and stuff. It's all Zoom now. So you are in the virtual chicken coop, trying to sell yourself amongst plenty of other
That's right.
chickens. And I think like just what you said, and this is what sales is in the modern B2B environment, and now is it's so everyone's commoditized. And so, how can you ask these insightful questions? How can you illuminate something that they haven't thought of that's a different way that you're coming at it? Because they think about these interviewers, they're coming on and it's expected behavior. They're like, okay, cue this, cue that, cue that. So they are looking for the person. So it's good that you caught on. Same with our customers. They're like, are you the blue logo or the red logo? Because to me, you're the same, right? And that's
No,
kind of what it
you're
is. So,
you're
how can you be that? So, good for you for cluing in and saying, like, I got to do this differently to really stand out. Um, it is it is unfortunate that you didn't get that feedback, because I think, just like you said, like, how am I meant to improve? And, as a sales leader, I'm sure you recognize the value of feedback even with your team when they're asking, like, how can I do things better? If you did any call coaching or role playing, that's how you don't know what you don't know. So I think, in this regard, perhaps you kind of sync up with a colleague or somebody and be like, can we practice together? So that you could get feedback elsewhere that even, how do I come across? Am I smiling? Am I centered in camera? Just because, again, it's not as normal as it was before. And so I think I'm just trying to come up with, solutions in the moment for those who are in that process,
the role playing
that
piece.
might make it more
Yeah,
comfortable. Yeah,
pardon me interrupting you.
that's
It's
okay.
the smart idea on the role playing piece. That is a critical piece of sales practice.
Hmm.
Is a
Hmm.
call plan that you put together. In tech anyway, or software or SaaS or whatever you want to call it, that you're going to likely have a demo plan that you're going to do. You're going to
Hmm.
define the roles and responsibilities of each of the personas on the call, what you
Hmm.
expect that they're going to ask, what you want to steer them towards, stay away from, be prepared, all these things.
Hmm.
But you're gosh darn sure going to likely go through a dry run, or some sort of.
Hmm.
So your
Hmm.
idea around a
Yeah.
role play is great.
Yeah. And even just for you. So, like you said, when we opened up the conversation, that visualization, like, this isn't my first time here. So, when you ask that question, I can already see myself answering it. I can see myself being confident. I'm relaxed and I'm creating a safe space for all of us. So, I think, yeah, we got to definitely put in the reps so that we're comfortable, we're conversational, but we're also memorable.
Boy, is that a bumper sticker? Yeah, it ought
I
to
know
be.
that kind of
Yeah, yeah,
flowed
that
nicely
did, that
there.
did. I would
I'll take that one.
tagline that guy if you can. Yeah, that's all kidding aside. That's the memorable piece is something that in one of my interviews, I think it was my fifth interview at this one company. I had actually after the first one, I had decided I was going to stand up. I have a stand-up desk, so I
Mm.
thought, okay, I'm gonna.
Mhm.
And some of that was just because I believe I think better on my feet. Why am I sitting now? I
Mhm.
don't have a good answer, but. Um, we needed to give a presentation. So the presentation I gave was how we beat the competition. And one of the pieces that I put in there was around being memorable. And how do you do that?
Mhm.
How do you know, and I believe it ends up being somewhat subjective, but yeah, you be conversational, authentic, memorable, all those things are smart.
Mhm. Well, you're being memorable right now.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's
You are.
yeah, yeah. You make this easy, Karen, and I know you have the right intentions of what you're doing to try to help your listeners. So I want to be part of that.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I'm grateful for you for sharing. So as we wrap it up, Chris, I want to thank you for just sharing everything, your vulnerability. As we opened, you said, even some of this is still some emotions are there. So might not have been easy to go back here, but I think that you're definitely helping. I'm going to remove think. I know you're helping people out there because there really should be no shame attached. This is part of life. There's growth you found in that moment of pausing, a lot of reflection, a lot of things that you're going to do differently. And that for me is gratitude and that wow, I can now reemerge not the exact same and I can be intentional with the pace that I want to do. I'm going to show up differently. And as a result, I'm going to attract different industry, different clients. And just, this is a 2.0. And so you can write your own 2.0 versus someone else writing it for you.
Yeah, yeah. Again, well described and succinct at that. And the being intentional is a very good approach to life. I'm guilty of. I'm not a planner, and so more spontaneous or impulsive, perhaps,
Mhm.
than I ought
Mhm.
to be. Likely, conversely, my wife is an incredible planner and not impulsive at all, which
Uh-huh.
helps. Uh, but having understanding what the intent is and then
Mhm.
acting with intent is I think it comes with experience and maturity, and I'm getting there.
Yeah, well, we're all works in progress, but it sounds like without stereotyping, you are an engineer. I do a lot of work with engineers, and they're very left brain, right? Very analytical, very process driven, and which is good. But even you said before, like there's an objective and there's subjective, so there's room for some emotion and creativity and imagination. And I think that if we can balance both brains, we just show up as our best authentic self.
Yeah, yeah, and that authenticity to me is. I heard this as recently as a mentoring coaching session I had yesterday afternoon with Ron and another colleague. Uh, I'm convinced that if we go back to the whole servant leadership thing, or even culture seems like a buzzword within companies now and so forth. And my belief is that it'll all come down to authenticity. It's just, and that doesn't mean
Hmm.
you always have to like what you hear or the audience
Hmm.
hears. It means that you're being, never perhaps overused word, transparent. It just means that
Hmm.
you don't have to be malicious in it or insulting in it. You just have to be who you are. And
Hmm.
that's tough to do. It took me a long time, I share that not because woe is me. I share that merely because it might be other people out there that
Hmm.
deserve to have a higher self-esteem, more self-confidence, and when you asked me to be part of this, you said, you don't have to give me an answer now. You can think about it. And I'm like, yeah, sure,
Hmm.
I'll do it. And some of that was, I mean, I go back to your open swim that you did a few weeks ago. That you were just, there's some trepidation there, maybe, but it was a let's
Hmm.
just go do this. So
Yeah.
what we first probably learned in sales is nothing bad is going to come from picking up the phone.
Yeah.
So just jump
Yeah.
in and do it with intention, be authentic.
Yeah.
You're going to learn.
Chris, in closing, what piece of advice, one, two, three things would you give to someone who's in your current situation? They've been let go, they're in a leadership role, and they're licking their wounds. There might be a bit of shame. What would you share with them to start in that rebuilding process?
Be comfortable doing something you're afraid of. I absolutely, well, so a quick anecdote. Someone hit me up on LinkedIn. They were a career career ownership coach, I think, which ultimately was to introduce people that are in 2.0 of their careers to franchises. Now, these aren't the McDonald's or Chick-fil-A's or whatever out there. It's more smaller businesses, but it's to have an ownership piece and do something. And I entertained that for a bit. And one of the self-assessments that I had to go through for that asked about, what are you scared of? Are you afraid to put yourself out there and so forth? And as much as I wanted to on paper or electronically say no, I realized I am scared of failing. I am absolutely scared of failing. I am fortunate enough to have enough success that anything less than success is scary. It's a reflection of my inability, of my being less than perfect, whatever you want to call that. So, what's true? What's true is that I have failed at a number of different interviews and didn't get roles. I don't. I hope I'm working hard enough to help uh, Ron Mao and Paperwork Pros succeed in this iteration of the company. I hope that our conversation brings something to someone that helps them over a hump or a hurdle. But that's my experience personally is doing something you're afraid to do is not easy, and doing something where you're afraid to fail can be paralyzing. And just similar to where you could talk yourself out of calling a prospect, you research them to death and you realize, they're never going to use our stuff or whatever that might be. Don't be afraid. Or how about this? It's okay to be afraid. Do it anyway. And if you fail, fail. Another colleague that I was fortunate enough. I had so many positive experiences, Karen. Maybe I'm going long here, so I'll try to keep this short. But a gentleman named Mike Belangi, who was a former CEO of a visual CPQ company, has become a trusted friend. I used to think he was the mortal enemy because he was a competitor of the company I worked for. But Mike and I were talking about something the other day, and I said, "But Mike, what if that strategy doesn't work?" And he starts chuckling and he says, "Well, of course it might not work." He said, "None of us have the exact right answer all the time, but you're never going to know until you try." And I realized his perspective was the not necessarily ready, fire, aim sort of perspective, but that idea is just, I'm just going to jump in and do it. And where I was far more tentative is, gosh, well, I could talk myself out of this thing. So, long answer to my recommendation is, if there's a fear of failure, don't just do it on a whim. Do it smartly. Do it with intention, but do it anyway.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. It's so good. And you did that. You did it for everything. So good for you. But I would also say that, the quicker we realize that failure is part of it, it's inevitable. Like, and that's the thing, people, when I coach people like, what if I fail? I'm like, oh no, you're going to. You're going to. Like, it's not like what if, it's you will. But when it's totally when, but it's not fail at a massive. It's like there's gonna be hiccups. But like your colleague, you gotta take a risk. And those and like he said, like, what if I don't? But even if I do, that's feedback going, okay, next time we're gonna do a little bit like this. And I think worse than that is not trying and living with regret or resentment, going, God, wish I would have had the courage to do that. I know I was afraid and I choked. Lean into that. And even what I always say is say yes and figure it out later, because you will. Look at you in the podcast, you know, you said yes, you probably were like, "What did I just say yes to?" But you figured it out and you did great, right?
Yeah, good deal.
And
Yeah,
so
all smart. Yeah, well said.
I think leading into the fear in anything we do, I think is really great. And so thank you for that. Thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability. And I would encourage you to continue leaning into that fear and do things that make you scared, because that's where growth is. You're like, God, that scared me so much. You're like, that? And now you're like, look at me now. I'm skydiving. I'm doing all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Yeah, yeah, it's for certainly growth, and I guess my experience is it's experience, and
Hmm.
and and that it if you can't leverage that in some way, which for gosh darn sure you're going to be able to,
Hmm.
just in whatever aspect of life, or again, consoling a colleague or coaching someone else, that yeah, there are far more reasons to lean in as you describe versus not do.
Yeah. Well, when you opened up, you said someone bet on you. And when you lead with fear, or when you accept that you're afraid, but you're doing it anyways, you're betting on yourself. Now, Chris, if people are, interested in connecting with you, maybe they have some questions and they're going through something. Is there a way to connect with you, or where can they find you?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. Probably the simplest way is through my LinkedIn profile,
Okay.
certainly. Uh, uh, Another way is my email is cdiello, that's CDIELLO at paperworkpros, all one word, .com. And yeah, I mean this with sincerity. Happy to answer, talk with anyone. I had a former colleague reach out, and we chatted for a bit, and he said he was interested in perhaps me being a mentor of his, which was incredibly flattering. And I don't know that I deserve it, and I don't know what I can bring to the table, but I mean it. I'm happy to. This stuff is the only way I can think to pay it forward,
Hmm.
and be able to help others. So happy to talk.
Well, that's great. Well, listen again. Thank you for your time. I know you've opened our eyes, you've opened our hearts, and you've normalized a lot of things that I would say a lot of people are struggling with right now. So, thank you for all that. I know it's going to make a big difference.
Good deal. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate the opportunity, and everybody out there, keep your head up high.
Absolutely. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. And we'll see you next time.